Right, well, thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. And I'm sorry I have to follow Mike and cut him off, but I think what I'll say really will dovetail with that. So just to introduce myself, I think I've been introduced as a social worker, and I am a social worker, and I'm a member of my professional association, which I have the British Association of Social Workers and the Scottish Association in Scotland. And I have to tell you, they did not support the proposal when the legislation was put to Parliament. But I'm shortly going to take up being the vice chair of the British Association, and this is something that I will be pursuing. But I'm also a parent, and I think this topic, really, everybody's shared a story about being a parent and about their families, and I think it lends itself to that. And as a parent, I know that when my children were young, and even still, you know, I'm still the boss, I was 24, me and their father were 24/7 responsible for them. We were prepared to put them first most of the time. I felt that we were the people who knew our children best and what was best for them. And I was very happy to get advice from professionals in education, in health, about any of their needs or their problems. Take the advice, but at the end of the day, with the benefit of that advice, we as a family, including the children, as appropriate to their age and what they understood, would be making the decisions about the best interests of our children. And as Stuart said, my feeling is, who else loves these children more than we do? And we know the answer to that. So while the imposition of named persons may not bring about the end of family life as we know it, I think the proposal, or the actual legislation now, it does represent a complete denial of families and of the crucial role of parents in families. Families are mostly, always, nearly always, except in very limited circumstances, families are the best thing for children, not services. Because in Saturday's Scotsman, I noticed the government again said, as an explanation, the named person isn't an imposition, it is in order for, parents asked for this, they said, and parents find it helpful, and it's a point of contact for parents in this mad world of services and service providers. But in fact, it's quite clear, and I've highlighted it there, that the named person is not a point of contact for parents, it's a point of contact about parents and children and families. And what the legislation says, I mean, there's even more if you read it. It's all about service providers, the nominated person of the service provider, or a person from an agency which has been subcontracted to be a service provider by this service provider. And it's service providers, it's quite clear there, will, where they consider it to be appropriate about our children's welfare, they'll decide what's in the best interest of a child. They will be interpreting a child's behaviour and their circumstances and safeguarding their rights, not the parent. That's the legislation. I think it's very, very open to challenge on the grounds that have been said. And speaking, from a social work background, although it's a long time since I worked in statutory social work, in child protection social work, family are actually seen as a risk. And fathers are seen as the biggest risk in families. The families almost seems to have been invented as a dangerous idea. And conversely, there is this belief that services are good. Services are protective. And as Mike said, that they know better. So, and that their best families are considered to be merely good service providers as caretakers on behalf of government. And it is true, I think, that parents of children with disabilities and special needs have asked for a point of contact in the madness, to not have to tell 6 different professionals their story or whatever. But that's not what's been given. And as we know, parents of children with special needs and disabilities can ask till they're blue in the face for even something as simple as an adapted toilet seat or, a bit of respite care in an evening, and they don't get it. So it's funny that this has been foisted on us. And I noticed a quote from the Minister. There was new guidance launched recently on child protection for children with disabilities. And then the Minister very kindly said, the vast majority of children affected by disability, the vast majority of families of children affected by disability provide safe and positive environments for children to grow up in. Providing an environment, is that what a family is now? Is that what caring for a child is. Are we all just service providers now? Is that the most that we can hope to be? I'm a service provider for my parent. Maybe I could nominate myself as a named person. So I think family is the biggest absence currently in national policy. It just doesn't get mentioned, and the state is now, the Act is called the Children and Young People's Act. And in fact, it's an absolute, I couldn't believe it, but this is absolutely true. This is an act that's heralded as legislation that's going to get it right for every child, and it does not mention families at all. I mean that literally. I actually did, you know, you could do a Google search. Families is not in the Act. I just think that's astonishing. And I thought when I pointed it out, you know, in some evidence to Parliament and in you know, stuff that I wrote, that people go, what are we doing? But no, they're not there. And in fact, there's more mention of corporate parents. There's twice as many mentions of corporate parents, which I think is an oxymoron. If ever there was one, I mean, a sensible social worker, not quite as much. So then there are of actual parents and carers. There's more mention of foster carers than there are of carers. So, and as a social worker, from my many years' experience, I can tell you that on the contrary, the state makes a lousy parent. How am I doing for time? 3 minutes, right. I did have a wee story that I was going to tell you, but I'm going to... and it was about a personal experience of mine where two children were mixed up in a classroom, and I was also mixed up with another parent who was presumably considered to be a bad parent, and that had never happened to me before. And because this teacher messed us up, my son was depressed, his work went to the bottom of he just was awful. He didn't want to go to school. He'd been a happy wee boy, popular and everything. But the good side of the story is that the child of this other mother, who was supposedly a bad parent, suddenly was the popularest boy in the class. He did really well. He and my friend and my son became really good friends. And what that told me was that teachers have this huge power to actually, you know, make a child sink or make a child soar. And also a huge power to make a parent feel dreadful. I have never felt as dreadful as when I was told I couldn't be with the children as an escort, as a parent escort. And when the mistake came to light, did they apologise? No, there was nothing to apologise for. The other mother was actually a blooming good mother. But the consequences for the children you could see. So service providers are not responsible and are not accountable for their acts. And the power of agencies who are called service providers in this act should be subject to enormous checks and balances. It's a sobering thought that parents can lose their children overnight, but service providers are virtually unaccountable for the harm that they may cause in doing that. And particularly this is the case for parents without money or power, which is why it tends to be parents with less money and less power who are subject to some of the more thoughtless interventions in their lives. So I just wanted to finish with this one, which is there is no evidence to support this. And I find that extraordinary as well, that normally if you introduce something like this, you would have national and international research. The one thing that there is national and international research, not the one thing, but one thing that I'm passionate about is family conferencing, where there's an issue where the decisions need to be made about a child, which is that you bring the wider family together to talk about what and to plan for this child and make the best for them, which is strengthening families. Now, there's lots of research evidence to show that's brilliant, and it works really well. It does strengthen families. It makes the service providers answerable to families to provide the resources and the services that they need, rather than the other way around. But that's not being legislated for. Instead, we have this imposition, which is not, there is no research evidence about it. In Highland, where the Getting It Right for Every Child was piloted, the only mention I could find of the named person in the evaluation was that it said that there was often more discussion of who was the named person and who was the lead professional at the conferences that the professionals held, and that sometimes that would dominate the whole discussion. And I think that says it all about where we're going to go with this one. I predict named persons guidance, named persons training, I predict all huge amounts of diversion, really, and which at the current time, when we're many children are facing, you know, time without food, when their families are reliant on food banks, when they're not able to keep their houses, and when really the services should be provided to make sure that children are getting breakfasts and dinners, there's going to be this huge diversion away. And it's a nightmare scenario, really, that is presented to us. I haven't even gone into the information sharing, but because I knew I wouldn't have time, but that's a whole other story that I could tell. So I think the last question I have to ask is just where is the focus on prevention and partnership with parents that we were promised and that government policy is supposedly set for? We have been given the opposite.